Stephen Van Rensselaer III was Lieutenant Governor of New York and a member of the United States House of Representatives, as well as a soldier, businessman and landowner. The heir to one of the largest estates in New York, his holdings made him the 10th richest American of all time, based on the ratio of his fortune to contemporary GDP. He founded the institution which became Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Early life. Van Rensselaer was born in New York City, the eldest child of Stephen Van Rensselaer II, the ninth patron of Rensselaer's Wijk, a large land grant in upstate New York awarded by the Dutch to his ancestor Kilian Van Rensselaer. His mother was Katharina Livingston, daughter of Philip Livingston, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. His family was very wealthy, and the Van Rensselaer Manor House was a rich childhood environment for the young boy to grow up in. However, his father died in 1769 when Van Rensselaer was only 5. Van Rensselaer was raised by his mother and stepfather, the Rev. A.R. Westerlo, whom his mother married in 1775, and his Livingston grandfather, his uncle, Abraham Ten Broek, administered the Van Rensselaer estate after the untimely death of Van Rensselaer's father. At an early age, Van Rensselaer was raised to succeed his father as Lord of the Manor. Van Rensselaer began attending Princeton College, since it was near to battles of the ongoing American Revolution. He later sent to Harvard College, from which he graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 1782. In 1783, he married Margarita Peggy Schuyler, a distant cousin and the daughter of renowned Revolutionary War General Philip Schuyler. Margarita died in 1801. A year later, Van Rensselaer married Cornelia Patterson, daughter of former New Jersey Governor William Patterson. On his 21st birthday, Van Rensselaer took possession of named Rensselaer's Wijk, his family's 1,200 square mile estate, and began a long tenure as Lord of the Manor. Van Rensselaer desired to profit from the land, but was extremely reluctant to sell it off. Instead, he granted tenants perpetual leases at moderate rates which saved would-be landholders from having to pay a large purchase price up front. This meant that they could invest more in their operations, which led to increased productivity in the area. Over time, Van Rensselaer would become landlord to over 3,000 tenants, and proved a lenient and benevolent landowner. In the first census of the United States in 1790, it was noted that he owned 15 slaves. By the time of the 1830 census, he had none, in keeping with New York's gradual emancipation law, under which all slaves in the state were freed by 1827. Early political career. A Federalist, Van Rensselaer was a member of the New York State Assembly from 1789 to 1791, and the New York State Senate from 1791 to 1796. He was elected as an honorary member of the New York Society of the Cincinnati in 1781. He was Lieutenant Governor of New York from 1795 to 1801, elected with Governor John J. Van Rensselaer. Over his time in politics, acquired a reputation as something of a reformer, voting in favor of extending suffrage and going against much of New York's upper class in doing so. In 1801, Van Rensselaer was the Federalist nominee for governor of New York, and lost to George Clinton, 24,808 votes to 20,843. He was one of the first to advocate for a canal from the Hudson River to the Great Lakes, and was appointed to a commission to investigate the route. In 1810, War of 1812. In 1786, Van Rensselaer was appointed a major in the militia, though the military was not Van Rensselaer's major pursuit. He was a major general by 1801. This experience led to Van Rensselaer's appointment to command troops during the War of 1812. When war was declared on Great Britain in June 1812, Van Rensselaer was a leading Federalist candidate for governor of New York. Democratic-Republican Party leaders, including President James Madison and incumbent New York Governor Daniel D. Tompkins, devised a way to remove Van Rensselaer from the campaign by offering him command of the Army of the Center, U.S. militia and regular army troops massing in upstate New York for an invasion of Canada. If Van Rensselaer declined a military leadership role during a time of war, he would lose esteem in the eyes of the voters. If he accepted, he would be unable to run for governor. Van Rensselaer accepted. Despite having held high rank in the militia, he was largely inexperienced at leading large bodies of troops. As a condition of his acceptance, his more soldierly cousin Solomon was appointed his aide-de-camp. But the Army of the Center consisted largely of untrained, inexperienced militiamen. Under the Constitution, they did not have to cross from upstate New York into Canada to fight. The British were in the process of fortifying the Queenston Heights that Van Rensselaer would have to attack, and his officers were itching for action despite the general's desire to delay until his troops were better trained and organized. To make matters worse, Brigadier General Alexander Smith, Van Rensselaer's subordinate, had a large force of regular army troops that was theoretically under Van Rensselaer's command, but Smith refused to subordinate himself to a militia officer. With some of his officers planning to try and force him from command, Van Rensselaer decided to act without Smith. On October 13, 1812, Van Rensselaer launched an attack on the British position that would evolve into the Battle of Queenston Heights, in which Van Rensselaer's forces were badly beaten by the British generals Isaac Brock and, after Brock's death, Roger Hale chief. Van Rensselaer's preparations and his plan of attack were clearly a major reason for the scale of the defeat. He was unable to secure the element of surprise, he did not procure enough boats for his men to cross easily, and he was even unable to supply his soldiers with sufficient ammunition. Despite significantly outnumbering the British in the early stages of the battle, the American soldiers, untried and untrained, sometimes refused to cross the river. Van Rensselaer was not even able to coax the boatmen into going back over to rescue the doomed attack force. The defeat at Queenston Heights spelled the end to Van Rensselaer's military career. After the battle, he resigned his post. Despite his military setback, Van Rensselaer was still the Federalist candidate for governor in April 1813. He lost to Tompkins 43,324 votes to 39,713. Later career. Van Rensselaer served on the Canal Commission for 23 years, 14 of which he served as its president. In 1821, he was a member of the New York State Constitutional Convention. In 1822, he was elected by special election to the seat in the House of Representatives that his cousin Solomon had vacated. He served from February 27, 1822 to March 3, 1829. During the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th Congresses. During the last three sessions, he was the chairman of the Committee on Agriculture. Role in deciding 1824 presidential election. In 1825, Van Rensselaer cast the vote that likely decided the presidential election in favor of John Quincy Adams. Because none of the four candidates received a majority of electoral votes in the 1824 presidential election, the U.S. House had to choose from the top three finishes: Adams, Andrew Jackson, and William H. Crawford. House members voted first individually by state, and then each state cast one ballot for the candidate who received a majority of the state's House delegation. A candidate had to carry 13 state delegations to win the election. Van Rensselaer had intended to vote for Crawford, but changed his mind and voted for Adams. His vote gave Adams a majority of the New York delegation. Winning New York gave Adams 13 states in the House vote, to 7 for Jackson and 4 for Crawford. Masonic Grand Master. Van Rensselaer was a Freemason, and served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New York from 1825 to 29. College founder. Van Rensselaer was a member of the University of the State of New York Board of Regents from 1819 to 1839, and from 1835 to 1839 he was the board's chancellor. In 1824 Van Rensselaer and Amos Eaton established the Rensselaer School, for the purpose of instructing persons who may choose to apply themselves in the application of science to the common purposes of life. Since its founding, RPI has developed a reputation for academic excellence, particularly in the field of engineering. Death. Van Rensselaer died on January 26, 1839. He was buried in a family cemetery at the Van Rensselaer Manor House, and was later reinterred at Albany Rural Cemetery, Section 14, Lot 1. Legacy. The town of Stephentown, New York is named for Stephen Van Rensselaer family. In June 1783, Van Rensselaer married Margarita Peggy Schuyler, the daughter of Philip Schuyler. After her death in 1801, he married Cornelia Patterson, the daughter of William Patterson, the second governor of New Jersey, and later, an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Stephen Van Rensselaer IV became the last patron of Rensselaer Wyke and inherited the manor in 1839 by his father's will. He graduated from Princeton in 1808. He served as Major General of Militia. During the anti-rent troubles in 1839 he sold his townships, and at his death the manor passed out of the hands of his descendants. Justine Van Rensselaer, who married Dr. Howard Townsend, a noted physician at Albany Medical College. Cortlandt Van Rensselaer, a noted Presbyterian clergyman. Henry Bell Van Rensselaer, a politician and general in the Union Army during the American Civil War, who married Elizabeth Ray King, a granddaughter of Rufus King. Stephen's younger brother Philip S. Van Rensselaer was mayor of Albany, New York, from 1799 to 1816 and later from 1819 to 1820. Other members of the Van Rensselaer family in Congress include Jeremiah Van Rensselaer, Killian K. Van Rensselaer, Solomon Van Rensselaer. Bibliography. Turner, Wesley B. The Astonishing General, The Life and Legacy of Sir Isaac Brock. Dundurn Books, 376 pages. Spooner, Walter Whipple. The Van Rensselaer Family. American Historical Magazine.